Is there a world in which the Big 12 can be competitive in a college football playoff game? Now, I'm talking about in this new era, the new Big 12, the new 12-team playoff, not the 4-team playoff, which I know a lot of people would say, well, no, they can't. But yes, au contraire, we always hear about the TCU national championship game and everybody forgetting that they beat Michigan and they were the only team to beat Michigan for over a year until the Wolverines were reigning national champions. But Ohio State is helping. Ohio State is definitely helping the Big 12's odds to be legitimately competitive in a college football playoff game. And I think this is a year, based on what we have seen broadly across the landscape, that the Big 12 can be actually competitive here. So here are your scenarios. First of all, like, where is the Big 12 at in all of this right now? What you will need to watch is Friday night. You need to watch the Mountain West Championship game, which is going to be Boise State and UNLV. It is a rematch. Boise State won a tight one against UNLV earlier this year. If Boise beats UNLV, they're going to get the bye in the 4 seed. I don't think, unless on Tuesday we find out that the committee loved Arizona State's knockout blow that they delivered to Arizona so much that they made them, they shoot them up a couple, like they gain a couple of spots on Boise, probably more like 3-4 spots. Then I don't think there's any way that Arizona State is passing them for just beating Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. So if Boise beats UNLV, they're going to get that bye and the 4 seed, which would send your Arizona State, Iowa State winner in all likelihood to the 5-12 game in the first round, maybe 6-11. I have seen a prediction or two that have the Big 12 champion. And in this case, I was seeing Arizona State as the 11 going on the road to a 6. Most likely it would be 12-5. If Boise loses to UNLV, which is definitely possible, as I mentioned, they played a really close game earlier this year, and UNLV has been on a heater. That's a pretty good team at this point. The Big 12 title winner should then get the 4 seed and a bye, which obviously makes a massive, massive difference. Being able to essentially, you're talking about the difference between your first game being, first of all, in the first round with no bye week and having to go on the road to the 5 seed versus playing the 5 seed in a neutral environment coming off of a bye where you have a rest advantage. So it's massive. It really is. It's hard to understate, to be honest. And for a while, I was seeing Ohio State as the opponent there. Like Arizona State, Iowa State would be shipped to the Ohio State, Oregon loser in the Big Ten championship game. Everybody assumed like, well, hey, Oregon's the higher ranked team. So everybody just projects Ohio State to be that team there. But now you're starting to see a lot of Notre Dame. If you go look at the latest round of projections from everybody on 3 ESPN, lots of people have Notre Dame slotted in as the number 5 right now. They can't go any higher because they're not in a conference. Stubborn MFs. They won't get in a conference. So the highest they can go is number 5, but they obviously have played really good football since losing to Northern Illinois. And so that's what you're starting to see. In the one instance where I saw the Big 12 champ mocked as the 11 seed, they were going on the road to number 6 Texas, which I would also say is a matchup that I would prefer to having to go play at Ohio State. And I know that everybody is going to say, like, what? Is there really that much of a difference? Like, we just saw Ohio State play at home and Michigan beat them. That was a 6-5 team. Yeah, I know that was a 6-5 team, but that is a 6-5 team that has Ryan Day in a chokehold. They have got him so vexed and just out of his mind. Like, Ryan Day does not lose to bad teams at all. He hardly loses to anybody not named Michigan, but he does not lose to bad teams. They're either losing in the playoff, losing on the road at Oregon, or losing to Michigan. There's like no in between. They take care of business all the time, which tells me it is very much just a Michigan thing. Like, the guy feels the pressure of it. It makes him do weird things like try and jam the ball down Michigan's throat, playing right into their hands for an entire game like he did on Saturday. There's something there. Outside of that, Ohio State takes care of business, and I would not want any part of having to go play that game. But if it opens up and it's somebody else. Now, this is assuming, too, that Oregon does beat Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, because if not, Oregon likely becomes your 5 seed. And then going to Oregon, like going to Autzen to play that game, also sounds like a nightmare, something that I would not want. If you really wanted to get in the nitty-gritty, you could say, well, Oregon played close games with Idaho and Boise earlier this year, so it's not completely out of the question, but that was a long time ago and a different Oregon team than I think what you're seeing right now. But if it's Penn State or Notre Dame, I feel significantly better about the Big 12's chances to be competitive in that scenario. I truly do. Penn State this year, their best win is Minnesota, Illinois. I would probably say like the more impressive of the two was going on the road to beat Minnesota, the way that the Golden Gophers were playing toward the end of the year, which, like, that's a good win. And I'm not saying that Penn State is a bad team. I have been very hard on Penn State in the past. I do think that they are a step above what has been typical, even though their resume generally reflects what frustrates and annoys me about Penn State most of the time, which is just lose to Ohio State, beat up on a bunch of bad Big Ten teams, mediocre to bad Big Ten teams, and then slap a 9 or 10 win season together, go to a New Year's Six Bowl, call it good. Only this time it would be heading into the college football playoff. But watching them, I do think that they are better. I think that they are better. Big part of that, Andy Kolenecki, who's now running the offense. But that is not as daunting a task as Ohio State. Very tough environment, still a good team, not Ohio State at the Horseshoe. Notre Dame, I realize that they are playing a lot better, and it is not the team that lost to Northern Illinois, but they have proven capable of that. They are proven capable of that this year, and I still feel like Riley Leonard, because of his passing limitations, not as high upside of an offense as you otherwise might see in that spot. I would feel much better about Arizona State going to Notre Dame than going to Ohio State. I will put it that way. So I don't think it's totally out of the question for a Big 12 team to win one of those games. Now, what would the line on that be? Arizona State or Iowa State going to South Bend, going to Happy Valley? I mean, it's probably going to be, you're probably like a 17-point underdog, I would think. But just look at what happened this weekend. Man, I already mentioned Ohio State, Michigan. How about 8 overtimes for Georgia Tech and Georgia? Like, Georgia Tech is the 5th best team in the ACC. I mean, they're solid. They beat Miami this year, but they're the 5th best team in the ACC. They had Georgia beat, if not for, I'll get on my high horse a little bit here, if not for a missed targeting call, a missed holding call that was pretty blatant there that everybody obviously was able to see. There were some things that really helped Georgia out in getting over the hump in that game. Georgia Tech could have very easily won that. Okay? Similar situation there in terms of the level of underdog that they were in that type of game. Miami lost at Syracuse. We already saw them lose to Georgia Tech earlier this year. Like, there just aren't dominant teams out there. Maybe Oregon. Maybe the way Oregon is playing currently. Maybe. But that you're going to see in the first round game in that 5 spot, if you're the 12 seed going on the road, I just don't feel like there is this daunting road that the Big 12 can't, like a hill that you can't climb there. It's not going to be likely. It's not going to be something that anybody would totally predict, but I do think it is much more possible because of everything we've seen throughout the sport this year. I mean, you look at these teams in the SEC that we're all talking about here. Texas made it all the way to the final week of the regular season without beating a ranked team. They finally do get Texas A&M. Georgia has certainly proved vulnerable and flawed this year. Outside of their 2 losses, I mean, they were Mark Stoops not being a complete coward away from losing to a 4-win Kentucky team. There's just a lot more parity these days, guys. The gap has closed between the haves and the have-nots simply because they can't hoard talent as much with the portal and NIL. Other teams can bridge that talent gap a bit with the rosters. So I think the league does stand a chance, contrary to what you might hear from some folks. Am I talking to J.D. Piquel on that? Maybe. All right. I'll talk more about that later on in the show as well. Now, if you can find a way to get Boise to lose, if they lose to UNLV, and then all of a sudden you're in that second round game, well, that's great. And as I mentioned, you get a bye, you get a neutral field. But also, if you do find a way to spring one of these upsets, it could almost be a twofer because now you're going on the road to Boise. And now you're talking about a game where the Big 12 team may well be favored. So there is a lot of upside there if you can find a way to pull one of these upsets. I'm not here to predict it. I know people will call me a Big 12 homer for this. That is fine. I just think if you have your eyes open to what's happening in the sport and what this season has told us about everybody out there, you would be unwise to completely discount the possibility of the Big 12 actually springing an upset in one of these.